I don't really remember this specific point in my story where my mental health fell apart. It wasn't like a light switch getting flipped off. It was more like a fader getting pulled down over the years until my life had deconstructed itself to nothing. You might show up here because the Madahe film dropped on this channel, or maybe you show up to watch the podcast twice a month, but this channel exists to bring mental health awareness to the world of bikes. And ultimately, it started for me to have an avenue to tell my own story. I was diagnosed in 2020 with bipolar disorder, and I guess you could say that I've been on kind of a crusade since then to bring mental health awareness to anyone who will listen. But most people don't want to sit and listen to somebody talk about mental health because it's uncomfortable. Some of you are already thinking about clicking off to something more uplifting, and I don't blame you. But where I have found the best conversations about this topic are usually when we're doing something else at the same time. Some of the best conversations I've ever had about mental health have been on bike rides with friends of mine, or in the workshop, working on bikes. So over the next few weeks, we're gonna do something together that's not just me sitting here and telling you my story. We're gonna strip this bike down completely until all that's left is the frame. And then we're gonna rebuild this same bike using a lot of random parts. Almost all the parts on this bike are gonna either come out of my parts bin or they're gonna come from now bankrupted bike companies where I've been able to go and find really cheap parts. The bike we're gonna work on is my Framed Basswood gravel bike. It's the bike that you for sure have never heard of. Framed Bikes went out of business last year as their parent company, The House, declared bankruptcy. I got this bike a couple years ago because it had the exact geometry of my very first gravel bike, a Niner RLT 9. And I got this bike brand new for $1,100 at the time. It has a set of WTB wheels that I'm convinced could survive the zombie apocalypse. They are so rugged and stout, but they also weigh what seems like a metric ton. It came with SRAM Apex 11-speed mechanical with mechanical disc brakes as well. Like I said, today we're gonna tear this thing down to the absolute frame, so we better dig in. I don't really remember the specific point in my story where my mental health fell apart. It wasn't like a light switch getting flipped off. It was more like a fader getting pulled down over the years until my life had deconstructed itself to nothing. But I left clues for myself along the way, or I guess we can look back in retrospect and see a lot of clues that I was leaving for everyone to find. I have no friends who remain with me from my 20s, and I only have a couple that made it with me through my 30s. I guess it's maybe a really honest, truth-telling style personality and the inability to have a filter. Today I know that a lot of the reasons I had trouble keeping friends was because of things tied in with bipolar disorder. They're things that I've had to learn to manage, but in my 20s and 30s, I honestly don't know what I thought. I just knew I couldn't keep friends. The 2010s were really interesting for me I had some of the best creativity of my life and productivity and success at the kinds of things I was doing. But I also had stretches during that time where I was really sick and it felt like we couldn't figure out what was wrong with me. And I had no energy pretty much all the time. I did leave some tea leaves along the way that we never really found until later. Like, I left this Facebook post, which like in itself is ridiculous, where I tell everyone that I went on this long bike ride or this huge amount of bike riding, and then I didn't sleep for a few days. And you know, people would say things like, man, JP's crazy, like he has all this energy. From 2010 to 2015, I actually worked a second full-time job aside from my teaching job. And I ran at an incredibly high pace. In 2015, I started to have these huge low spells. And the doctors couldn't really figure out what was wrong. I got tested for mono. I got tested for a lot of different things, including HIV, because they couldn't figure out why I had no energy. And why all I wanted to do was lay around and rest. Sometimes my energy would go up, like in 2018 when I felt really good for about 6 months. I actually won some bike races, and that's when I got into mountain biking. But overall, my energy was fluctuating pretty wildly at that time. In 2019, I started to have these episodes, I guess you could say, of creativity that would last for anywhere between a couple days and a month. And these times of creativity would be paired with runs of no sleep. And when I say no sleep, I mean sometimes 0 hours of sleep, or sometimes long stretches of nights where I would get 2 hours of sleep only, or maybe 4. But rarely was I getting the amount of sleep I should, and I would just be really creative and work. And they would be followed by a massive crash where I wouldn't get out of bed and do anything for usually a couple weeks. Except for nobody noticed that was happening, because the first crash coincided with the pandemic lockdown. And the second one was also during lockdown. The third big really high energy wave I rode was in the fall of 2020 as we went back to school, and it lasted for over 5 weeks. And by the end of that 5 weeks, I had gone for almost 3 weeks without any sleep, and I hadn't eaten for a week. And I started having major panic attacks, and I finally realized I needed to get some help. I didn't actually go and get help because I thought something was wrong with my mental health. It was in the middle of the pandemic, and I'm the soccer coach at our school, and we were having a really good season, and the panic attacks had made me start to feel like my chest hurt and my heart would beat really fast, and I was really concerned that I had COVID. And at the time, if you got COVID, the high school league was going to come and shut your season down, and I was terrified they were going to shut down the season for these boys I was coaching. So I went and got help from the nurse, mainly because I was scared I had COVID and they were going to shut the soccer season down. And thank goodness she had a lot of experience with mental health, and she got me in there and talked to me for about half an hour, and she said, I guarantee you don't have COVID, but you do need to go to the doctor, to the hospital right now, and you're gonna get help for your mental health. I have had doctors tell me that I was probably 1 or 2 days away from needing to be fully committed, and my nurse at the high school that I work at saved me from that because of the state I was in. She got me real help when I needed it. I knew I needed real help at that time, even though I couldn't explain to anybody what was really wrong with me. At that point, I didn't even know what so many of the things that have to do with bipolar are. I just knew something was wrong and I needed a lot of help. By December 1st, I had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and I didn't really know what to do because I had this deconstructed life that was a total mess, to be honest. And in some ways, like, some things hadn't changed at all. Like my soccer season, we had finished out, and I had had the best season ever as a coach, and our program had had its best season ever, and that had gone really well. But other areas of my life were just a mess, and I didn't really know how to fix it or what to do about it. And really, I had a million question marks in my life about how was I going to fix any of this? And how was I going to move forward? have this frame stripped down to absolutely nothing left on it. And I guess it's time to rebuild this thing, one piece at a time. Don't be afraid to ask for help. You are worth the risk to reach out and say, I'm maybe not okay. You don't have to know how to explain it. Just ask for help, because you are loved and you are enough. So if you do need help, find a loved one or a friend or a coworker or someone who you can talk to and ask them for help. And if the first person doesn't listen to you, go find somebody else, because you are worth it. You might be watching this and you're just fine, but it is likely at some point someone will come to you struggling. And when they do, you need to be ready. First, make sure they're safe, and then talk to them. If you're stuck and you don't know what to do, you can call 988, the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, where a person will guide you in the steps for what is next. All of this might feel like a risk to you too, but I promise you, it's worth it. They're worth it.